Greetings. Greetings to all. Happy Thursday. I hope everyone's blessed to be here and join with me today for another time, another round of Storytime with Dr. Tinsley. Today is April the 9th. It's a Thursday afternoon, and where I am in New Jersey, the sun is shining and the weather is warm. And so I give thanks that in the midst of the pandemic, the seasons are going on and we're seeing nature blooming. My plants are starting to come up, and so I'm grateful. So happy Thursday to all. This is day 25 of me sharing stories with you. And I've become to look forward to this part of my day every day because I love children's literature and I love children. So for me, it's such a treat to be able to combine two of my loves, literature and children, in the same activity. So with that said, I'm happy to share stories with you every day. I have two multicultural stories to read. I love multicultural stories. I love stories that teach us and help us learn about different cultures and traditions. Um, and so I have two stories to read. And so let's begin. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine in the stories that I share every day. Welcome. Hey, Cousin Lisa. Nice to see you. Blessings to the Hampton family and to the Tinsley family and to all the families out there in my sphere. I'm sending love to all of you. Be well, stay safe. And for those of you who are dealing with people that have transitioned, and I'm putting it mildly because this is for children, I send my love and prayers and blessings and condolences. And so I have two stories to read to you today. The first one is called The Patchwork Quilt by Valerie Flournoy. And I just want to say my grandmother, Helen Hampton, was a quilter. And she made beautiful quilts that with designs, log cabins and wedding rings and building blocks. She also did painted quilts. She was a painter. She became a painter in her latter years at 65. And she made painted quilts for my children for their cribs. So when I read this book, it brings back fond memories of my grandmother, and it's called The Patchwork Quilt. And the illustration is by Jerry Pinkney, and you'll notice he's a noted illustrator for soft watercolor prints. The Patchwork Quilt. Tanya sat restlessly on her chair by the kitchen window. For several days she had had to stay in bed with a cold, but now Tanya's cold was almost gone. She was anxious to go outside and enjoy the fresh air and the arrival of spring. "Mama, when can I go outside?" asked Tanya. Mama pulled the tray of biscuits from the oven and placed it on the counter. "In time," she murmured, "all in good time." Tanya gazed through the window and saw her two brothers, Ted and Jim, and Papa building the new backyard fence. "I'm going to go talk to Grandma," she said. Grandma was sitting in her favorite spot, the big soft chair in front of the picture window. In her lap were scraps of materials of all textures and colors. Tanya recognized some of them. The plaid was from Papa's old work shirt, and the red scraps were from the shirt Ted had torn that winter. "What you gonna do with all that stuff?" Tanya asked. "Stuff? These ain't stuff. These little pieces gonna make me a quilt, a patchwork quilt." Tanya tilted her head. "I know what a quilt is, Grandma. There's one on your bed, but it's old and dirty, and Mama can never get it clean." Grandma sighed. "It ain't dirty, honey. It's worn the way it's supposed to be." Grandma flexed her fingers to keep them from stiffening. She sucked in some air and said, "My mother made me a quilt when I wasn't any older than you. But sometimes the old ways are forgotten." Tanya leaned against the chair and rested her head on her grandmother's shoulder. Oh, shoot. Way it's supposed to be. Oh, shoot. Grandma flexed her fingers to keep them from stiffening. She sucked in some air and said, "My mother..." Oh, I'm sorry. Ooh, I hit the wrong button. I apologize. Just then, Mama walked in with 2 glasses of milk and some biscuits. Mama looked at the scraps of material that were scattered all over. "Grandma," she said, "I just cleaned this room and now it's a mess." "It's not a mess, Mama," Tanya said through a mouthful of biscuits. "It's a quilt." "A quilt? You don't need those scraps. I can get you a quilt," Mama said. Grandma looked at her daughter and then turned to her grandchild. "Yes, your mama can get you a quilt from any department store, but it won't be like my patchwork quilt, and it won't last as long either." Mama looked at Grandma, then picked up Tanya's empty glass and went to make lunch. Grandma's eyes grew dark and distant. She turned away from Tanya and gazed out the window, absent-mindedly rubbing the pieces of material through her fingers. "Grandma, I hope you make your quilt," Tanya said. "Thank you, honey. Let's start right now. We'll be finished in no time." Grandma held Tanya close and patted her head. "It's going to take quite a while to make this quilt. Not a couple of days or a week, not even a month. A good quilt, a masterpiece." Grandma's eyes shone at the thought. "Why, I need more material, more gold and blue, some red and green, and I'll need the time to do it right. It'll take me a year at least." "A year?" shouted Tanya. "That's too long. I can't wait that long, Grandma." Grandma laughed. "A year ain't that long, honey. Making this quilt going to be a joy. Now run along and let Grandma rest." Grandma turned her head toward the sunlight and closed her eyes. "I'm going to make a masterpiece," she murmured, clutching a scrap of cloth in her hand just before she fell asleep. "We'll have to get you a new pair and use these old ones for rags," Grandma said as she hung the last piece of wash on the clothesline one August afternoon. Jim was miserable. His favorite blue corduroy pants had been held together with patches, and now they were beyond repair. "Bring them here," Grandma said. Grandma took part of the pant leg and cut a few blue squares. Jim gave her a hug and watched her add his patches to the others. "A quilt won't forget. It can tell your life story," she said. The arrival of autumn meant school and Halloween. This year, Tanya will be an African princess. She danced around in the long flowing robes Mama had made from several yards of colorful material. The old bracelets and earrings Tanya had found in a trunk in the attic jingled noisily as she moved. Grandma cut some squares out of the leftover scraps and added Tanya to the quilt too. The days grew colder, but Tanya and her brothers didn't mind. They knew snow wasn't far away. Mama dreaded winter's coming. Each year she would plead with Grandma to move away from the drafty window, but Grandma wouldn't budge. "Grandma, please," Mama scolded. "You can sit here by the heater." "I'm not your grandmother. I'm your mother," Grandma said. "And I'm going to sit here in the Lord's light and make my masterpiece." It was the end of November when Ted, Jim, and Tanya got their wish. They awoke one morning to find everything in sight covered with snow. Tanya got dressed and flew down the stairs. Ted and Jim and even Mama and Papa were already outside. Some animal outside my door caught my attention. Sorry. "I don't like leaving Grandma in that house by herself," Mama said. "I know she's lonely." Tanya pulled herself out of the snow, being careful not to ruin her angel. "Grandma isn't lonely," Tanya said happily. "She and the quilt are telling each other stories." Mama glanced questioningly at Tanya. Telling each other stories? Yes. Grandma said a quilt never forgets. The family spent the morning and most of the afternoon sledding down the hill. Finally, when they were all numb from the cold, they went inside for hot chocolate and sandwiches. I think I'll go sit and talk to Grandma, Mama said. Then she can explain to you about our quilt, our very own family quilt, Tanya said. Mama saw the mischievous glint in her youngest child's eyes. Why, I may just have to do that, young lady, Mama said as she walked out of the kitchen. Tanya leaned over the table to see into the living room. Grandma was hunched over, her eyes close to the fabric as she made tiny stitches. Mama sat at the old woman's feet. Tanya couldn't hear what she was said, but she knew Grandma was telling Mama all about quilts and how this quilt would be very special. Tanya sipped her chocolate slowly, then she saw Mama pick up a piece of fabric, rub it with her fingers, and smile. From that moment on, both women spent their winter evenings working on the quilt. Mama did the sewing while Grandma cut the fabrics and placed the scraps in a pattern of colors. Even while they were cooking and baking all their Christmas specialties during the day, at night they still worked on the quilt. Only once did Mama put it aside. She wanted to wear something special Christmas night, so she brought some gold material and made a beautiful dress. Tanya knew without asking that the gold scraps would be in the quilt too. There was much singing and laughing that Christmas. All Grandma's sons and daughters and nieces and nephews came to pay their respects. The Christmas tree lights shone brightly, filling the room with sparkling colors. Later, when everyone had gone home, Papa said he had never felt so much happiness in the house, and Mama agreed. When Tanya got downstairs the next morning, she found Papa fixing pancakes. Is today a special day, too? Asked Jim. Where's Mama? Asked Tanya. Grandma doesn't feel well this morning, Papa said. Your mother's with her now till the doctor gets here. Will Grandma be all right? Ted asked. Papa rubbed his son's head and smiled. There's nothing for you to worry about. We'll take care of Grandma. Tanya looked into the living room. There on the back of the big chair rested the patchwork quilt. It was folded neatly, just as Grandma had left it. Grandma didn't want us to know she wasn't feeling well. She thought it would spoil our Christmas, Mama told them later, her face drawn and tired, her eyes a puffy red. Now it's all up to us. Now it's up to all of us to be quiet and make her as comfortable as possible. Papa put an arm around Mama's shoulder. Can we see Grandma? Tanya asked. No, not tonight, Papa said. Grandma needs plenty of rest. Oh, excuse me. It was nearly a week, the day before New Year's, before the children were permitted to see their grandmother. She looked tired and spoke in whispers. We miss you, Grandma, Ted said. And your muffins and hot chocolate, added Jim. Grandma smiled. Your quilt misses you too, Grandma, Tanya said. Grandma's smile faded from her lips. Her eyes grew cloudy. My masterpiece, Grandma sighed. It would have been beautiful, almost half finished. The old woman closed her eyes and turned away from her grandchildren. Papa whispered it was time to leave. Ted, Jim, and Tanya crept from the room. Tanya walked slowly to where the quilt lay. She had seen Grandma and Mama work on it. Tanya thought real hard. She knew how to cut the scraps, but she wasn't sure of the rest. Just then, Tanya felt a hand resting on her shoulder. She looked up and saw Mama. Tomorrow, Mama said. New Year's Day was the beginning. After the dishes were washed and put away, Tanya and Mama examined the quilt. You cut more squares, Tanya, while I stitched some patches together, Mama said. Tanya snipped and trimmed the scraps of material till her hands hurt from the scissors. Mama watched her carefully, making sure the squares were all the same size. The next day was the same as the last, more snipping and cutting. But Mama couldn't always be around to watch Tanya work. Grandma had to be looked after, so Tanya worked by herself. Then one night, as Papa read them stories, Jim walked over and looked at the quilt. In it, he saw patches of blue. His blue. Without saying a word, Jim picked up the scissors and some scraps and started to make squares. Ted helped Jim put the squares in piles while Mama showed Tanya how to join them. Every day, as soon as she got home from school, Tanya worked on the quilt. Ted and Jim were too busy with sports and Mama was looking after Grandma, so Tanya worked alone. But after a few weeks, she stopped. Something was wrong. Something was missing, Tanya thought. For days, the quilt lay on the back of the chair. No one knew why Tanya had stopped working. Tanya would sit and look at the quilt. Finally, she knew. Something wasn't missing. Someone was missing from the quilt. That evening, before she went to bed, Tanya tiptoed into Grandma's room, a pair of scissors in her hand. She quickly lifted the end of Grandma's old quilt and carefully removed a few squares. February, March came and went as Mama proudly watched her daughter work on the last rows of patches. Tanya always found time for the quilt. Grandma had been watching too. The old woman had been getting stronger and stronger as the months passed. Once she was able, Papa would carry Grandma to her chair by the window. "I need the Lord's light," Grandma said. Then she would sit and hum softly to herself and watch Tanya work. "Yes, honey, this quilt is nothing but a joy," Grandma said. Summer vacation was almost here. One June day, Tanya came home to find Grandma working on the quilt again. She had finished sewing the last few squares together. The stuffing was in place, and she was already pinning on the backing. "Grandma," Tanya shouted. Grandma looked up. "Hush, child. It's almost time to do the quilting on these patches. But first, I have some special finishing touches." The next night, Grandma cut the final thread with her teeth. "There, it's done," she said. Mama helped Grandma spread the quilt full length. Nobody had realized how big it had gotten or how beautiful. Red, greens, blues, and golds, light shades and dark, blended in and out throughout the quilt. "It's beautiful," Papa said. He touched the gold patch, looked at Mama, and remembered. Jim remembered too. There was his blue and red from Ted's shirt. There was Tanya's Halloween costume, and there was Grandma. Even though her patch was old, it fit right in. They all remembered the past year. They especially remembered Tanya and all her work. So it had been decided. In the right-hand corner of the last row of patches was delicately stitched, "For Tanya from your mama and grandma." And that's the end of the Patchwork Quilt by Valerie Flournoy. You know, as I was reading it, I kept thinking about the quilts that I have in my closet that my grandmother made, that need to be repaired. And I think while I'm home on a coronavirus shutdown, I'm going to at least pull out the wedding rings quilt she gave me as a wedding gift 40 years ago. And I have it, and it's a beautiful quilt. But I think I'm going to pull it out and repair it in tribute to my grandmother. So that was the Patchwork Quilt. So I have a second book, but I want to say hi to my cousin Lisa. Hi, Nadine and Lori. Hey, Nadine and Lori. Hi, Aunt Carol. Hi, Catherine. Hi, Sharon. And I know there's other people, but I can't. If I try to see you, I lose you. So I don't want to lose you. I already lost you once. So the second book is called Jalapeno Bagels. And I think it's important for us to learn about the diverse cultures that exist in our community and in our neighborhoods, in our children's schools and grandchildren's schools, because it's a diverse world. And we have to stop sort of putting people in pigeonhole boxes. You know, when I look at my family ancestry, I have great grandparents from 4 continents, not just countries. I have one that's of Native American descent from the United States, my African ancestry. I have a great grandfather whose family's from Liverpool, England, and my other great grandmother is from Australia. So here I am, I identify as an African American woman, a Black woman, but I have ancestry from 4 continents and countless countries. So we're very diverse, you know, and at the bottom line, we're all connected. We're all human, and we have to look out for one another. So this is Jalapeno Bagels by Natasha Wang, illustrated by Robert Casilla. Jalapeno Bagels. What should I bring to school on Monday for International Day? I asked my mother. My teacher told us to bring something from our culture. You can bring a treat from the panderia, she suggests. Panderia is what Mama calls our bakery. Help us bake on Sunday, then you can pick out whatever you want. It's a deal, I tell her. I like helping at the bakery. It's warm there and everything smells so good. Early Sunday morning, when it is still dark, my mother wakes me up. Pablo, it's time to go to work, she says. We walk down the street to the bakery. My father turns on the lights. My mother turns on the ovens. She gets out the pans and ingredients for pan dulce. Pan dulce is Mexican sweetbread. I help my mother mix and knead the dough. She shapes rolls and loaves of bread and slides them into the oven. People tell her she makes the best pan dulce in town. Maybe I'll bring pan dulce to school, I tell her. Next, we make empanadas de calabaza, pumpkin turnovers. I'm in charge of spooning the pumpkin filling. Mama folds the dough in half and presses the edges with a fork. She bakes them until they are flaky and golden brown. Some customers come to our bakery just for her turnovers. Maybe I'll bring empanadas de calabaza instead. You'll figure it out, she says. Ready to make chango bars? Chango means monkey man. Mama lets me pour in the chocolate chip and nuts. When she's not looking, I pour in more chocolate chips. I can bring chango bars. They're my favorite dessert. Me too, says Mama. This batch should be especially good. I put in extra chips. My father calls from the back room, Pablo, come help me with the bagels. Papa speaks English and Yiddish. He learned Yiddish from his family in New York City. I know some words too. Bubbe means grandmother. He uses my Bubbe's recipe to make the bagels. First, he makes the dough in a big metal bowl. Then he rolls it out into a long rope shape. He cuts off pieces and shows me how to connect the ends in a circle. We put the circles on trays where they sit and rise. While we are waiting, my father makes challah, Jewish braided bread. He let me practice braiding challah dough at my own counter. It's a lot like braiding hair. The customers say it's almost too beautiful to eat. Maybe I'll bring a loaf of challah to school, I tell Papa. Papa, he smiles. When the bagel dough has risen, he boils the bagels in a huge pot of water and fishes them out with a long slotted spoon. I sprinkle on poppy seeds and sesame seeds, and then they go in the oven. Maybe I could bring sesame seed bagels with cream cheese. No lox? Lox is smoked salmon. My father's favorite bagel is pumpernickel with a smear of cream cheese and lox. I crinkle my nose. Lox taste like fish. Jam is better. My mother joins us and helps my father make another batch of bagels, jalapeno bagels. My parents use their own special recipe. While Papa kneads the dough, Mama chops the jalapeno chilies. She tosses them into the dough and adds dried red peppers. We roll, cut, make circles, and let them rise. I can't wait until they are done because I'm getting hungry. Have you decided what you're going to bring to school? Asked Mama. It's hard to choose. Everything is so good, I tell her. I look at Papa, except for lox. You should decide before we open, warns Mama, or else our customers will buy everything up. I walk past all the sweetbreads, chongo bars, and bagels. I think about my mother and my father and all the different things they make in the bakery. And suddenly I know exactly what I'm going to bring. Jalapeno bagels, I tell my parents, and I'll spread them with cream cheese and jam. Why jalapeno bagels? Asked Papa. Because they are a mixture of both of you, just like me. And that's the end. And then they give you the recipe to make chongo bars, jalapeno bagels, and they give you a Spanish glossary in the back of the book. And that's jalapeno bagels. So I hope you enjoyed these two stories today. That was the Patchwork Quilt and jalapeno bagels. Again, I enjoyed you reading to you today. I hope everyone has a great afternoon. Enjoy the rest of this beautiful day. Be well. Wash your hands. Wash your hands. And if you can, stay home. If you must go out, please practice good social distancing. Wear your gloves, wear your mask, and be safe. Until tomorrow, God bless you all. Peace.